let's talk about the mistakes that I've made when running Dungeons and Dragons for my kids and their friends. Now, I've made a lot of mistakes and continue to make mistakes, but hopefully the new mistakes that I make are not the same as the old mistakes that I'm going to discuss here. I don't know. I'll have to have a think on that one. When writing the script for this, I realized that the mistakes that I've made most commonly really fall into three broad categories, and those are attention, guidance, and complexity. So I hope by sharing these mistakes with you that maybe you can learn something or at the very least have a laugh at me. I don't mind. This is the Young Heroes Guild. I'm Jacob, and this is where I talk about Dungeons and Dragons, specifically running the game for and with kids. So if that sounds interesting to you, consider subscribing. Now, let's get into the first set of mistakes that I made, and those have to do with attention. And I think these are probably the most common or likely mistakes that a dungeon master would make when running a game for kids, and that is that I really expected my kids to demonstrate that they were paying attention in the same way that an adult does. And there are several issues with this. First, kids haven't learned the social cues to demonstrate that they are paying attention in the same way that adults do. And beyond that, kids simply don't have the full attention span of an adult. These two things combined just caused me a lot of frustration, and likely I caused my kids a lot of frustration as well. If they were drawing or, maybe standing up or doing anything that I thought showed that they weren't paying attention, I would, oh, you're not, I would try to pull them back into the game. And this just caused a lot of unnecessary headaches. And I think made points of the game not enjoyable for anyone. And I've since realized that kids need a bit more room and flexibility, and just because they need to stand up and maybe move around doesn't mean they're not paying attention. Just because they're drawing in their notepad or whatever, it doesn't mean they're not paying attention. And just because they're not paying attention doesn't mean they're not having fun, right? As long as they're not being disruptive, and as long as I can bring them back into the action when the time comes, I really let kids kind of drift off a bit. One example of this is that my youngest son, Aster, has started drawing player badges. If someone does something particularly, I don't know, clever at the table, he'll make like a little badge with a brain on it and say, oh, here's your intelligence badge or something like that. He'll cut it out, he'll put some tape on it, and then the player can wear it. Now, this may seem like it's disruptive or that he's not paying attention, but for me, this allows him to remain at the table. He's listening enough that the action at the table is inspiring his art. So I don't mind it, and I think it's fine, stuff like that. Now, the next set of problems were problems that I thought I was being a good dungeon master, but it turns out I wasn't. Big surprise, right? I was afraid of railroading my kids, right? And I didn't realize that they needed more guidance than I was giving them. I was so afraid of forcing an issue that I just didn't provide enough for them to interact with, right? With my adults, even with a more linear arc, I still try to give them a ton of freedom. I don't want them to feel like they're being forced in any direction. And so that mentality spilled over into how I run games for kids. And kids simply need a little bit more to hold on to. And even beyond that, I've now realized that sometimes I will force a situation. Now, I'm not saying that I take away their agency, but if a particular scene is drawing out, they're just struggling to move forward, I will just cut to the next scene. Oh, you're now here. And that felt really icky at first, even the idea that I would do that. But since then, since I've started doing this, I've realized they're having a lot more fun. I'm having more fun, and that's really what it's all about. And now my last group of problems is one that's a bit funny for me because I'm not one who I don't coddle my children. I don't think it's great to speak to children like they're not intelligent. I know that kids need spoken to. They need a bit more guidance sometimes, and they need um, I don't know what the word is. They're not adults, but we should not speak to them like they're dumb just because they're not adults. Kids are smart. They're just kids. With all this in mind, though, I made my games incredibly oversimplified, right? I unintentionally stripped away a lot of fun for them because I thought that simplicity would equal fun. And in reality, it's kind of the opposite, right? My social encounters, all my NPCs were super super transparent. Whatever their goals were, or whatever they were trying to accomplish, was super obvious, and that made any social encounter kind of pointless, to be honest, because it was just they were just getting information, and that was it. Beyond that, combat too was incredibly flat. It was simply hit the thing or run from the thing. Maybe it was you could have some kind of social encounter because initially my kids weren't they didn't love killing everything, right? They kind of do now. But it was very simplified combat, or very one dimensional, I should say. And since I've realized that they need a bit more complexity, combat has become a lot more fun for them and for me. The first combat that I actually ran, once I started kind of toying with this idea that they needed a little bit more complexity, was very eye opening. They encountered a hag in a swamp, and her hut was on this island that was surrounded by crocodile infested water, and there were a few islands dotting the area. And instead of this combat turning into a free for all and it was just chaotic, the players really coordinated and worked together, and it took no prompting from me. I didn't have to preface the combat by explaining, now this is a bit different. No, I just presented the scenario, and they did everything themselves, just like instinctively. One of them was doing ranged attacks from an island. Two others were protecting that individual from the crocodiles that were trying to attack them. And two others were able to get quickly to the island with the hag. They rescued the NPC. One of them escaped with it, and then they they killed the hag. And I was so amazed that they did it with such coordination, and it really didn't take like I said, it took no prompting from me, and they were better coordinated than half the adult gamers I've played with. So I quickly realized that my simplifying the game was really stripping away a lot of the fun for them. Those are the three large categories, or broad categories of issues that I've created, I guess, for my kids, for myself. Um, I don't know if you've learned anything from these mistakes, but remember, kids can pay attention. It just looks a bit different, and kids do need a bit more guidance than some adults, and that they also can handle and appreciate complexity. We don't have to simplify everything for them. These are the things I've learned. I don't know. I'll look back on this in a year, and I'll have some other embarrassing mistakes to share with you.